Hi, good afternoon. It's Carol Dover, President and CEO of the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, and I want to thank you all. I know this was incredibly last-minute notice to get on this webinar, but we have quite a few people that have registered because obviously what we're about to talk about today is super important. We have had a big week for the industry between the governor releasing phase 2 and the Senate passing out the final phase of the PPP, which, by the way, was just signed by President Trump an hour ago. So we've got two major things going on in our industry. So the first thing we're going to do, the first part of this webinar will be with Secretary Halsey Beshears, who you all know is our top, not only our top regulator, but he works and answers directly to the governor and has been such a champion for our industry in helping us navigate through something that none of us have ever had to deal with before. The Secretary knows that we have a lot of questions. He's been unbelievable in standing side by our industry as I'm constantly blowing his phone up asking him questions. So I asked him late yesterday if he'd be kind enough to join us. So the first thing I want to do before introducing the Secretary to you is I'm just going to run through a couple of the major things about phase 2 that we all, most everybody should be aware of. And that is that beginning today, all counties except Broward, Palm Beach, and Miami-Dade, restaurants do remain at 50%. And I know that is super confusing. We're getting a lot of questions about, but there's some things on the website that say 75%. And I'm going to let the Secretary address that once he starts talking. The other thing is you're now allowed to serve at your bar seating within the restaurant. Bars in 64 counties may open at 50% capacity and full capacity outdoor, so long as we have the appropriate social distancing. For the hoteliers that are on today, we have still no restrictions unless you have local ordinances that supersede the state regulation. There's no specific restrictions on group size, but here's the operative and the most important word is that it's recommended that we avoid gatherings no larger than 50. Remember, it used to be 10, now it is 50, but the difference is the word recommended that there are no gatherings larger than 50, and again, the Secretary is going to address that. Weddings, funerals, etc. are obviously larger. The governor is encouraging temperature taking, social distancing. Vacation rentals are open in 51 counties, including the newest edition of Miami-Dade. And I believe the Secretary, as when I talked to him late yesterday, was working on the FAQ sheet and was working on nightclubs and some of the questions they were getting regarding that. Bowling alleys, movie theaters, etc. can open at 50%. And then I know that we do have some nightclub owners that are members, and so I think the Secretary will also address that. But most importantly, Mr. Secretary, if you would please, I know you and I talked yesterday about the 75% versus 50%, some of the questions about booths and back-to-back booths and bar seating, and we have lots of questions. So if you would be so kind to welcome Secretary Halsey Beshears, and if you would maybe address the intention of many of the things here in phase 2 that will help our members. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Okay, thanks, Carol, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope this webinar finds everyone doing as well as can be expected, continuing these challenging times. I think that the biggest thing to note on the governor's last order, and after speaking with General Counsel up there, is to note that basically if it's not listed in Section 2, Section 3, that everything is back open to 100%. What that means, though, is there's still, like the pari-mutuels and casinos, for example, they are allowed to open at 100%. However, they're submitting safety plans via the county and through DBPR, and we're reviewing those. And they're limiting themselves. Sports venues is another question, which kind of it touches you indirectly, because as people begin to travel again for this, they want to know if they can, their venue's going to be open or not. They're allowed to be open at 100%, but we are assuming that these sports venues are going to do the right thing, they think, in order to make their patrons and their customers safe. The 75% thing that Carol talked about, I can tell you where the confusion came from. Originally in the governor's phase 2, the task force and the recommendations that we made, it listed 75%. So when he talks about phase 2 in his press conference, he mentions that. And so I think some of the media out there went and just assumed they said phase 2 opening. And the truth is it's not. He's very specific about that in his executive order under section 4, part A, and it was very specific in there. Restaurants are all allowed at 50% of their indoor capacity, excluding employees, and the bar areas may be open with seated service. Again, that whole entire bar area and the bar is open, but it's only to the 50% of the indoor capacity, excluding employees. So that should help. I hope that clears up the 75% question that people had that we've been getting that a bunch. The other thing I think it's important to mention, though, is retail is open 100%. Nothing is limited on there, again, except what's under 4A through D. And then Department of Health also, they'll be coming out with their stuff, their services like the tattooing, body piercing, acupuncture, tanning, massage. Again, all these outside services that we have, they're synergy with everyone here, because the food, restaurant industry, the hotel industry, these are where people go in to do while they're staying here. So I think the last thing that's worth mentioning, Carol, though, is the conventions. Again, social distancing is just recommended, but the conventions, they're all allowed to have their stuff as long as you can maintain some sort of social distancing in there. And really, I think it's better off if I just answer questions directly, Carol, unless you have some. I thought that may be easier. Again, I hit on all the high points for everyone,
yes, sir.
except for nightclubs. So I will say this for nightclubs. Our reading is we've determined nightclubs to us are strictly just a quota license with no other license that is attached to it. That means a food service license or any other type of license under that company's name. If they have a dance floor and it's 500 people building occupancy or more, that is a nightclub. If you are a bar, a straight bar, or even a nightclub, some classify as a nightclub, but you have a kitchen, you have food services that are allowed in there, and that is not by our definition a nightclub. We're talking about strictly just the quota license for that business, nothing else. Dance floor, 500 people or more, that's the stuff that the governors want to avoid. So I hope that helps answer those questions. And again, you can email me at halsey.beshears@myfloridalicense.com. I've joked with you all, you know this, I'm the only Halsey Beshears in the whole state, and it's not real hard for me to find, sadly, but you're not looking real hard if you're trying to get in touch with me. Anyway, I hope that helps on that definition, Carol.
It does, Mr. Secretary. And, we talked at length yesterday about booths that are back to back, not booths that are side to side against the wall. Could you please address that?
Sure. And so, again, it's a common sense approach here for the restaurants. You need to do what's going to make your employees, your customers and your patrons feel safe. At 50% occupancy, you just need to spread it out. There's no mandatory plexiglass that needs to be put up. DBPR isn't saying you need to do any of that. I was in a restaurant yesterday where they were doing that themselves. It is just a matter of trying to space them out the best that you can right now. Your customers are going to let you know if they don't feel safe, okay? And I think as we continue to open up that last portion of this for restaurants, that the booth thing will take care of itself. So I do realize there are many restaurants with booths back to back to back to each other. Ask your customers if they feel safe and maintain that 50% occupancy, and you will be fine. Take a pragmatic, common sense approach in there. And I will say this out loud because there are a lot of lawyers on the line, I'm sure. Let's just not overthink that. Let's do what's right. Let's use some common sense, and let's spread the people out till we get back to where we can a sense of normalcy.
Great. Mr. Secretary, we have a question about screening employees, and there's a lot of, I think, confusion about the inconsistent guidance on the issue of what screening questions should we be asking our employees.
We have, let me double check on this. I think we have a list of our guidelines that we recommend, Carol. And again, I think it's just use some common sense here. You can look at some of the vacation rental guidelines if you want. see if people have come from hotspots, see if they've traveled to parts of the country that are their COVID-19 hotspots. But if we'd like, I'll see if I can get a list of those up that we could recommend, if that would help, Carol, if I don't already have that up. And I apologize, I do not know the answer to that right off the top of my head.
Okay, that's all right. We'll get it. We will get that one out. One of the things I want to make sure that everybody heard the secretary say is that the 50% is excluding employees. We're still getting those questions. You do not need to include your employees in your head count. Dan?
Yes, Secretary, you got a question here again at the bar. You're seated at a bar. Can a couple have their seats together, or do they have to be 6 feet apart?
Well, I mean, if you're not getting along with your wife or your girlfriend, you may want to seat them 6 feet apart. But otherwise, by all means, sit together.
Yeah, got a couple other questions here. It's kind of on the same page that Carol asked. The question from our clients: is the 14-day self-quarantine still enforced for guests traveling in from other states?
Yes, that is still recommended.
Okay, recommended. Okay. How do you interpret social distancing at our bars and our restaurants?
So if I have a bar area and the maximum occupancy in there, is supposed to be over 30, around 30 or 40, and everybody knows what I'm talking about here. The side of the restaurant that has the bar, the waiting room. If you have 30 people allowed in there, just cut it in half. People, I think, are going to, in this new world, they're going to start socially distancing themselves. Okay, and I don't think it's not going to be rude anymore for people to say, hey man, would you mind just giving me a little bit room? And as the manager of the restaurant, if he sees it too crowded in there, he needs to step in there and just say, hey, would y'all mind giving each other some room? Again, we're not going to be the social distancing police out there walking around enforcing this, but the managers and the restaurant owners, it's going to be incumbent upon themselves to make their customers and their patrons feel safe.
Okay.
Thank you.
I hope that answered that. Divide it in half, keep them spread out.
And just keep them spread out.
Yeah, how about, I got another question. Are hotel pools at 100%?
Yes.
Okay, great. That answered that one.
That was easy.
That was easy. Did you answer the one?
Can I ask this one? Secretary, you answer. You can ask this. Can I ask, we're getting a lot of questions about 6 feet versus 4 feet. And I know, when you and I have talked, you've been very, again, use common sense. These are recommended guidelines. Is there, is 4 feet, I know many states have gone to 4 feet. Is 4 feet acceptable?
Well, I mean, social distancing says 6 feet. So to me, 6 feet is 6 feet. One's 48 inches, one's 72 inches. There's no, I mean, I don't know what to do to that. So okay. It's a comfort level.
Right. Okay.
Is valet parking allowed now?
I will tell you, yes, it is allowed, but I know like the pari-mutuels that have opened up, there have been several venues that have opened it up and they're just not allowing it because they don't think it's safe or they don't think they can keep it clean for whatever reason. But it is allowed. It's up to the private business themselves to determine whether they want to do that or not.
This is a catch-22, Carol. I'm not sure you've asked it right, but are they still required? Are they still required for employees to start their shift screening? Employee screening questions. Did you ask that, Carol?
Well, the thing is yes. He wasn't sure exactly what questions have to be asked during employee screening. He will get back to us on that one.
I think it's on our website. Excuse me, I thought you answered that, but someone else sent me that. So
it's just. I mean, look, again, this is all under the guise of making your customers feel safe.
Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, they're coming up.
They're coming. Bear with us, Mr. Secretary. Yeah. We're getting questions. If you've got the time, I think it will save a lot of phone calls.
A lot of these you've already answered. For example, does the 50% indoor and 100% outdoor capacity still require the 6-foot distance between tables for restaurants? Yes. Right. Well, yes. Yes. Unless it's a booth.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
We also have another question. What restrictions or best practices apply to events such as receptions, business meetings, graduation celebrations, and similar?
Well, I mean, look, if it's outside, number one, it's going to be hot as you know what coming up here in the summertime. And so people are going to move around. They're going to stay spread out as much as they can. Again, I think it's just being practical with what you can and can't do inside. I think the hotels are not going to have a 200-person ballroom and put 300 people in it right now. I think they're going to limit it to what the customer wants to do until people are safe doing that. I mean, at the end of the day, look, I'm happy to do this all day too. But we are in a new world right now where people are just going to operate differently. They're going to feel differently. I don't think it's rude anymore for people to say, give me some space. There are some people that are going to be offended by that. And as a business owner, then you're going to have to find a way to deal with that without offending your customers, or, you're going to decide that you don't want to service them. And so I want to tell you that I can give you these answers, but at the end of the day, it is incumbent upon the business owner for us to find a way to operate in the new world right now. For example, I was a part owner in a bike shop for a long time. And so the bike shop employees that are there now, they're not wearing masks. They're not wearing anything in there. People are coming in with masks. Some are, some aren't. They have a conversation up front about what makes that customer comfortable. And I just think that that's the way we're going to have to operate right now. We can have all the guidelines in the world, and there are people that are still going to overcrowd their place of business, that are overcrowd their bar, overcrowd their restaurant, even when they're back to 100%. And the customers that are feel comfortable going in there, they're going to go. And the ones that are not, they are not. So we have to find a way to operate to get everyone to feel comfortable again until a vaccine is found, or everyone gets back to that psychological level where they feel like they can go anywhere without fear of getting sick.
Okay, Mr. Secretary, can we circle back to the states, Louisiana, New York,
New Jersey,
and New Jersey?
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's not in this order, but you say it's still recommended that they self-quarantine. So it's not necessarily mandated, but it's recommended. Is that
No,
correct?
hold on. I think it's still mandated. I have it right here in front of me, and I'll be glad to tell you. And I will tell you this while we're on that, and I'm looking at it. I can read and look at the same time. Vacation rental plans are out there, and the counties are starting to realize they need to amend that, or they need to relook at how they originally wrote it. It was always my opinion, just my personal opinion, that you should look at active cases and not total cases, because if there's 700 cases per 100,000, there are some places that are never going to get out of that number. But if you look at the active cases, again, it gives you a different set of guidelines to fall under. But I know the governor still has those states that it is mandated that you still quarantine if coming from those states. And I will find the exact language where it says that for you, Carol. Okay.
Well, while you're looking, I want to then clarify a situation from last week in the hotel industry. Hoteliers need to remember that nothing in Chapter 509 outside of you cannot discriminate for race, color, creed, or religion. Nothing requires you, if you take the temperature of a guest and their temperature is over the 100.4, nothing mandates that you take them in your hotel and they quarantine in the hotel. Mr. Secretary, we had a lot of hoteliers saying, once I let them in the room, what am I going to do? We've got, housekeeping has to go in. They have to get food. How do I know they're not out by the pool? They don't want that responsibility. So we were making it very clear to them, they don't have to take them. It's clearly up to the operator.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is 100% correct. It's Executive Order 2080 and 2082 further define what those quarantine requirements are. And yes, they are still required from that New York tri-state area. They must self-quarantine for 14 days upon arriving in Florida.
New Jersey, Connecticut, Louisiana.
Okay.
Again, that's Executive Orders 20-80 and 20-82 that list that out. Those are still.
Okay. Okay. And that is New York, Louisiana, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Is that correct?
Yeah, the tri-state area, Louisiana, Connecticut.
Yep. Okay. Dan?
Secretary, regarding wedding venues that are not classified as restaurants, are they also able to open at 50% capacity with social distancing in place?
A wedding venue is a private affair. They're allowed to do whatever they want to do as long as it's, on their place. If hotel and the hotel decides they're comfortable with it, they're allowed to do what they want to do.
Well, the questions also, what about dancing? I'm sure you'd like to answer that one.
I'm a great dancer.
So they can dance if the hotel is okay with it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, hold on just a second. There's a couple others here. Just to clarify, Secretary, this keeps, maybe they didn't hear you. At the bar, it is 50% plus 6 foot distancing, correct?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Hold on. Good. What do you suggest we find an employee that has been in contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19 and that employee shows absolutely no symptoms?
I'd ask them to stay at home for 7 days if it was me. There's no protocol on that, but you're going to have to find a way to deal with it.
Okay. Thank you. Hold on.
Bear with us.
There's a lot.
They're still coming in. If you're okay, when you're not okay, if you'll just give me the high sign.
No, I will. I appreciate it. That's on my rant for a minute. Hopefully you were getting some questions during that, and I apologize about that. It's and I do sense, we hear it every day, Carol, and I know you and your team here too, the frustration level that's out there, and it's, but we are going to be in this for a long time, even when it's opened up 100%. Do you wear masks? Do you make your customers wear masks? Do you make your employees wear masks? I mean, we're all starting to see that, and there are going to be people that do that long after it's mandated because they think it's necessary, or they think that's what they need to get the customers in their door to make them feel safe. So
I've got a couple other questions. In Palm Beach County, part of the opening of bars may include a plan to open that would need to be presented to the mayor. Have other counties had to present such plans? Is there a suggested plan to be presented?
No, sir. Outside of those 3 counties, there's been no suggested plan on how to open. We had some recommendations for restaurants that we published out there on what they should do. But again, those are all just recommendations, is what they are. So, but there have been on bars.
I probably got the most important question of the day. And is to-go drinks still allowed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, we have an outdoor seating in a concert venue stage. Does this mean we are allowed seating at full capacity and concerts allowed with social distancing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think. What could the next phase look like? Originally, phase 3 was 100%. Have we slowed down, or we go directly to 50% to 100%? In other words, what's it going to look like? Any idea?
Well, I think, again, our governor's done a great job on how he's managed this, and he's used the task force recommendations where he saw fit, and he balances that with science against what's safe for Floridians, for the citizens. And so I think as he continues to monitor that, and he monitors, if there's any spike again in activity, that he can make that call. But I can't tell you exactly where phase 3 goes. I would think maybe with, if nothing changes, the restaurants and bars would go to, to minimum 75%, maybe 100% straight to that. But he's been very cautious and measured, and I will continue to follow him in that regard. So I can't speak to that, but I can't see it maybe another 2 or 3 weeks, and hopefully we can get this thing back rolling again.
Thank you. Any recommendations for hotel buffets and continental breakfast at hotels?
I've had that. A lot of people ask me that, and I can only give you my opinion. Again, I think it's a matter of, you have to make your customers feel safe. You're certainly allowed. And so if you can keep it clean and make the customers feel like it's clean, then by all means, you're allowed to open it back up. I mean, we're not the ones that say right or wrong on that.
Okay. Are large public events permitted, for example, 4th of July on the beach?
Yeah, they are. And so I know Mayor Curry, I don't know what his announcement was. He was going to do one today, as a matter of fact, on what the celebration was going to be for the 4th of July, what it looked like. And I'm sorry I missed that announcement if he made it already. So yeah, counties are going through that themselves, trying to decide what they can and can't do. Most of that stuff's outside, which the governor's encouraged outdoor activity. Humidity, ventilation, hot weather, things that they kill the coronavirus. So I think that it's going to be on the county. It's up to them what they want to do for all 4th of July events. And then for the private industry that wants to do it, they're going to have to decide whether they want to do it or not.
Okay, thank you. This may be more of a local issue. It says, what time does bars and restaurants need to close? Still 10 p.m. closing? Must be a local.
That's a local thing.
Okay, I thought so. Okay. I think we've answered a lot of them, and we may have a bunch more, but they seem to be the same question.
Yeah.
I think it's important, well, if there's a couple more coming, or you look, I mean, don't forget Section 2, Part B, very specifically, it just says all persons in Florida are encouraged to avoid congregating in groups larger than 50 persons. So obviously an outdoor concert somewhere is going to have more than 50 people. You have to make that decision on whether you feel safe being there or not. Part A of that says senior citizens and individuals with significant underlying medical conditions are strongly encouraged to avoid crowds. So the governor said on TV the other day, there have been 0 deaths for people that are the age, from newborn to 18 years old. 80+% of the deaths are for 65+ years old. So a pile of those are the people that need to avoid these kind of situations. Underlying health conditions, who they are. And so you have to find a way to make your customers, your patrons feel safe, and get people back out there. And at the end of the day, I know these guys just want to get back to work too.
Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you're still getting this question too, but I'm going to ask it to you in the form of a question, even though I think I know the answer. Are gloves and temperature taking and mask mandatory that our employees wear?
No, they are not mandatory.
Okay. Again, it's up to the individual operator. Many are mandating it. Some are doing temperatures. Y'all, it's all over the board. We're getting a lot of establishments that we represent, or their whole team are wearing masks. A lot of them are taking the temperatures at the front door. But again, like the secretary said, it's your choice, keeping your customer comfortable and safe and using common sense.
That is exactly right. I've been in a couple of places where they said the state's making us do that, and I just kind of chuckled, and I was like, really? Show me where that says it in statute right here.
Right, there you go. So whoever asked that.
So this one is a little different. So the airplane flying questions, have you been on a plane in 14 days? Is that still true? Or you have no work for 14 days if you travel on an airplane? That's
I don't know if that's still in there or not.
I wouldn't think so. In other words, they're asking can you ask an employee, has he traveled or a guest on an airplane for 14 days?
Has he been on an airplane? And then if so, they have to quarantine for 14 days.
Do you have to ask them that question even?
I'll find our list of suggested questions for their employees. Okay.
Okay, that'd be great. That's super.
I'll shoot it to you, Carol, a link to it. Okay.
Charlie, is it 50% fire code? Oh, that's that question 50% of the fire code or 50% of the capacity of your seating capacity? Which one is it?
Whichever one's greater.
We like that.
There you go.
Do you get that? Whichever one is greater.
I think we're
We
pretty
good?
much covered a lot of them. I may miss a few, but
Secretary Beshears, I want to thank you on behalf of the industry. I am telling you all, when I call him, he 100% of the time either picks up the phone or texts me and says, I'll call you back in a minute. He has not once not been there for us through this process. And I just want to say a personal shout out and thank you. And I hope that as soon as this association is back to having board meetings in person, which next week our board meeting will be virtual, but hopefully in November, we will be in person, and I'm hoping to have Secretary Beshears with us so we can properly thank him for all the hard work and dedication he and his team have put forth, and jumping on this call at the last minute yesterday afternoon. I really appreciate it. And so again, thank you for all your hard work, Mr. Secretary.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Glad to help. And trust me, you don't have to thank me. I'm glad to be here and glad to be in the position I can where I can help. So as long as we keep this thing balanced, let's keep it moving forward in the right direction for everybody. And I just hope it continues. The cases will continue to drop so we can get Florida back rolling again. Okay. Thanks for the opportunity though, Carol. Anytime. Good to hear from y'all.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Secretary.
I know we had a lot of questions we may have not have answered, but they're similar, and we can send them over there. And
We'll get them out.
We'll get them out to you. So thank you very much.
You got it. Thank y'all.
Great. All right, thank you. And the rest of you will please stay on for Part B. We're going to begin to now address the federal PPP program that has passed. And as I said, President Trump signed it a little over an hour ago. And we have Rick Van Warner and Bryce Woodyard here to talk to you about the update that has taken place where the loans have gone from 8 to 24 weeks. We've extended our loan coverage. I'm not going to go through all of it in detail because that's what they're here to do. So if I could turn it over to Rick.
Carol, before you turn over to Rick, you might want to tell what the National Restaurant Association, American Hotel and Lodging Association, our partnership with them has helped make this change.
Unbelievable. Both the national trade associations that we're affiliated with have worked round the clock, literally 7 days a week. We're hearing from them on how hard they've pushed. And I can tell you that Senator Rubio, who now is still over the committee that this went through in the Senate, there were, even 72 hours ago, there were still a lot of questions as to whether this was going to make it or not. They were locked down on 16 weeks and not 24. And with the hard work and lobbying on behalf of the industry, we now go from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick and let you take it from here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we could advance the slide. You should see some slides up now. What we're going to try to do is give you a really quick summary of what a lot of you have heard already that was just become law today on the key changes to the PPP loan. And the other thing that I want to mention prior to getting into this is the fact that the website that is tied to this that we'll be putting out later, we did not update that website because the thing just was signed an hour ago, but it will be updated later this afternoon. So go back on if you have additional questions. The big thing is the option to take the loan if you've already got it up to 24 weeks versus the 8 weeks, which of course the 8 weeks was just about to run out for some people. So it also extends the coverage of the loan, gives you up until the drop dead of the end of the year to bring back employees versus having to have everybody back by the 30th. The part of the loan that has to be applied towards payroll costs has dropped to 60% from 75%, which is good news. And the overall period of the amount of loan that is not forgiven at the end of the day goes to 5 years versus 2 years. Another good news. There is some uncertainty around this delayed payment of payroll taxes. So we'll get into that in a moment. My colleague Bryce Woodyard will talk to specifics on that, take questions. And there's a couple new exceptions which are really good for our industry, given the pandemic and given the fact that business, it's unrealistic to think that most business is going to be back to pre-pandemic levels probably anytime soon, but certainly it'll be several months, if not next year, before things are really back to where they were prior to this thing. So one of those exceptions is, several people have chosen not to come back to work or don't feel safe, or they've gone on to other industries or left the areas where they previously were working. It's definitely tougher to find qualified people. Not everybody's coming back to their jobs. not to mention that many are being paid significant unemployment amounts currently. Secondly, obviously, we know that sales are not going to come back immediately and can't come back anywhere near to what it was until we can get the dining rooms open to 100%, et cetera. So to the next slide, couple specifics. I'm going to turn this over to briefly go through, and then we'll get into questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Bryce. And what does this really mean for you guys and for all of us? And Bryce will take it from here.
Thanks, Rick. So kind of getting into it, the most important piece, I think, is the extension from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. What this means, I think, for most of our clients are now seeing, maybe we were at 40 to 50% forgiveness over the 8 week period, but now if you elect to extend forgiveness to 24 weeks, if we keep going on this current path, chances are you can get pretty close to 100%, if not 100% forgiveness. Now you do have to elect the 24-week covered period. They haven't released specific instructions on how to do that, but it seems that you will just go to the bank that you got your loan from and ask for a 24-week forgiveness period. And that effectively, if you got your loan middle of May, that puts you in the October-November timeframe to pay out payroll funds and rent funds that are eligible for forgiveness. One of the other items pretty important is the payroll expenditure requirement drops from 60% down from 75%. You may ask, well, now that there's a 24-week period, I can probably spend 75% on payroll. Well, it's also important to note if you've got a pretty high rent payment, that 15% now can go to rent as opposed to payroll, especially if you're not able to get back to 100%. So that's a big I think advantage because some restaurants, it might take a long time before they can hire back. And so they might struggle to even reach 60% of the PPP proceeds on payroll. Now, the other part that there's still guidance coming out on is, regarding the FTEs. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more later in this slides, but I think overall the most difficult piece of this and the number one item that's going to prevent people from seeking 100% forgiveness is the FTEs. And as Rick mentioned earlier, there are a couple ways around that, or a couple things that I think could help, but it's still, I think that's going to be the focus on achieving full forgiveness is, can you get back to full FTEs, or can you at least use one of the two opt-outs to exempt yourself from that requirement? Let's see here. A couple other PPP loan specifics. Borrowers now have 5 years to repay the loan instead of 2. A quick caveat to that is the guidance says that PPP loans received today onwards are eligible for the 5 years. PPP loans received yesterday and beforehand, you have to go to your bank and ask for 5 years. The act does not prohibit you from doing so, but banks right now are just going to assume if you've already received your PPP loan that you're okay with the 2 years. So you will need to go to your bank and ask for the 5 years if you aren't able to get 100% forgiveness. Going back to the FTE discussion, there's 2 exceptions for that FTE rule, and it's if you were unable to find qualified employees to hire. There's a couple key points that you need to hit in order to achieve that. One of which is you need to write a formal letter or document your offer to the employee. And probably the other big key is then if the employee says no, or the potential employee says no to your offer, then you have to turn that into the unemployment office. That's probably the most important part of finding qualified employees to hire. And then the other exception is if you are not able to achieve February 15th sales by the end of December, then you can also apply for exemption from the FTE rule. And I know for some Florida restaurants, this is huge because seasonality allows that to, you might have huge sales in December or November or October, or you might have huge sales in February and low sales in December already when things were normal. So I think seasonality, there's no guidance to take that into account. So I think it's a straight measure your sales around February 15th and compare it to a period on or before December 31st. And if your sales are lower, then you are exempt from the FTE requirement. A couple other items that remain unchanged. Interest rate is 1%, and you are able to exclude employees who've turned down good faith offers to be rehired. Same requirements there. The key questions, I think we've answered a couple of these already. Does the 5-year amortization apply to all loans or just new loans? It applies to all loans if you go to your bank and your bank is willing to extend the amortization from 2 to 5. But that's a conversation if you've already received your PPP loan that you have to go to your bank for. If your business doesn't resume to pre-COVID-19 levels, what are the options to achieve forgiveness? It's make a good faith effort to restore employment and measuring your business operations at February 15th, 2020 and comparing it to the next 6 months. I believe there's going to be additional guidance released on that. So I would imagine in the next 2 weeks we'll get more clarification on that. Another key question is when can payroll tax deferment start? I think that is a discussion with your payroll provider. If you are working with an employee leasing company, that's an even larger discussion because technically they are eligible for that payroll tax deferment. But from the initial discussions I've had or been involved with, I think that will be passed down to the restaurant or hotel. A couple things that can be done now. I think the biggest thing is planning for the FTE rule. I know it's going to be hard to predict sales, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, even 20 weeks from now, but in our opinion, that is probably going to be the most difficult hurdle. So over the next 24 weeks, you'll probably go through your entire PPP loan on payroll, even if you're at 50% capacity. So the question I think becomes, are you going to be able to get back to 100% FTEs or not? If not, do you think you'll qualify for either of the exemptions? Another item is preparing for the new normal. We believe that in-store dining for the foreseeable future, meaning at least the next 6 months, is going to be reduced. And so we'll start planning for a greater takeout and delivery. And if you're not accustomed to takeout and delivery, I think now's the time to evaluate and develop a really good plan, because I think that there's going to be a huge shift from in-store to takeout. And so having the right takeout strategy, delivery strategy with packaging and online ordering is very important. We'll get into that a little bit later here. So going along the planning side, what is the new normal going to look like? This is kind of what we're telling our clients is run a scenario of 75% of your sales, and can you be profitable at 75% of sales? And then start looking at 75% of sales. Are the rents that I'm paying still in line? A good rule of thumb for a lot of restaurants is your total rent should be 10% of sales or less. And then also start looking at your general administrative expenses and just basically this is just to see, okay, if things don't come back quickly, are we able to still be profitable? If not, then we need to change what we're doing. With takeout and delivery, one thing that we're frequently seeing is if you have a link to Uber Eats, Postmates, DoorDash, any of those providers on your website, we strongly encourage you to work with your point of sale provider, your technology provider to sort of bring that in-house. There's a lot of great options that you can link to your website that are significantly cheaper than paying 10 to 15% of fees for takeout and 25 to 30% of fees for delivery. What we're recommending in a lot of cases is something like an Open Dining, a Chow Now. Toast has a great, easy to use online ordering platform. And then there's a great service that started about 3 years ago by DoorDash called DoorDash Drive. And they will deliver in most major Florida markets for a fixed fee rather than a percent of sales. Generally speaking, it's $7 to $8 for a delivery, and you can pass all or some of that on to the customer. And generally speaking, if your check average is $20 or more on your takeout and delivery orders that they're coming through Postmates and Uber Eats, then it makes more sense to look at DoorDash Drive as an option. It's kind of like a white labeled delivery service. And other than that, I think we'll open it up for questions. Rick, if you wanted to kind of take a look at the questions here, and we can get into that.
Sure.
Hey,
I don't
can
see
I-
them presently, so I think I'm going to let the FRLA folks just
Rick,
to.
hold on just a second, Rick.
So-
Carol has something else she wants to know.
Yeah, this is a little bit, I guess, of breaking news. The Louisiana, I'm going to revert back to the first part with Secretary Beshears. The Louisiana question about the states that are still quarantined, Louisiana and I-10 area were all lifted from the quarantine at midnight yesterday. So they are no longer, they're in phase 2 now. So no longer is Louisiana in a quarantine situation. So it's just the tri-states, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. Okay, I just wanted to get that in before we go any further. What else?
Yeah. Rick, are you ready for some questions? We don't have that many, believe it or not.
Sure.
But first of all, this is recorded, so it'll be available later today or first thing in the morning or next Monday at the latest. That's going to be recorded. Rick or Bryce got a question. Is the staff supposed to receive 100% of their average wage from PPP loan?
Bryce?
So that can get very complicated. We've been looking at for hourly staff. I don't think that's going to be a requirement. Now for salary, that could play a role, but again, over the next 6 months, it becomes tricky. So what we believe is that they're going to focus on the total wage amount rather than what individual people were getting paid. For the FTE requirement, however, I think it's based more on hours than it is on wages. And same thing, if your salary, I think that it's as long as you're within labor laws that a salaried person is counted as whether they're making 80,000 or 60,000.
Thank you.
And I think just to add in on the FTE thing, most of us went down to 30 hours, because that's where the threshold is of part-time, full-time, et cetera, under a lot of the new guidelines that went in, last couple of years. So I think that, that FTE component is important for people to understand and embrace. I don't know if you want to mention anything more on that.
No, I think that covers it. Really, if, let's say you had a GM making, $80,000 and, as part of, the painful reductions we've all had to make, they're now making $60,000. I think regardless, it will count as one FTE, even if they're still making $60,000.
Bryce, I think you answered this question before, but I just want to make sure this person heard it that asked the question. What if an employee finds another job and is unwilling to return to work, or do you need to document that?
If you are looking to achieve forgiveness through that approach, then yes, you'll need to document it. You will also, if you hire an employee and then they take a job elsewhere during the forgiveness period, that does not count against you. They will still count as an FTE. So voluntary resignations or voluntary terminations, and then also terminations for causes will not be penalized.
Right. I think that exception that we talked about is in play there, which is you got to kind of, when you're offering somebody to come back, you got to have a written record of that. So you got to text them or email them and have their response and keep their response that they're not coming back, because I think you've got to have that documentation to apply for any of the exemptions on that. And it's going to come into play when you have to go and fill out the PPP forgiveness form associated with these loans. That's the kind of stuff that you're going to need to have in pocket, not just a phone call where somebody says something to you.
Do you have to let the unemployment office know, Rick or Bryce?
I think that that's part of the requirement under the letter of the law.
Okay.
And again, the idea is trying to get, they don't want people taking the unemployment and going back to work at the same time.
Bryce, could you repeat the different delivery options someone asked?
Yeah, so, and I'll talk a little broader on that too, because this is an area where we're seeing huge opportunity. A lot of people use Uber Eats, DoorDash, Postmates, and in a lot of situations, they'll just put a link on their specific website. And so when somebody goes to order food for that restaurant, they'll just click and it'll take them to Uber Eats. Well, a better option that we see is is keeping the online ordering kind of on your website using a service like Open Dining, Chow Now. Toast has a great online ordering product built in if you have Toast as your point of sale system. And those services, they charge a fixed per location fee, like Open Dining and Chow Now are both around $100 a month per location. And you can order online. So a guest can go in, they can order takeout from your website. You don't pay any fees. They can still pick it up from your website. It integrates with your point of sale system. And then if you want to include delivery on the back end of that, so if you want takeout and delivery on your website through one of those services, then there's a service called DoorDash Drive, which is in some of the major markets of Tampa, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Orlando, Miami. DoorDash Drive is in all of those markets, and it's still DoorDash drivers. It's just they're charging you as the restaurant operator as a fixed fee as opposed to a percentage, and you have the option to pass that through to your customer. Because right now, when you go to a Postmates, not only are you getting charged a 25-30% fee, but then they're also charging the customer a $5.99 delivery fee. Some cases less than that, but you can now pass that same fee on to the customer, and now you're not paying a percentage of sales. So it really kind of changes the metrics or the profitability of online ordering.
Yeah, and if I can add in, the other big advantage to that is if you start by having those orders go through your site, you own your customer data, whereas if you are only using the third parties sites, then they own the customer data. You don't really have any knowledge of who's that order. So I think there's a lot of, not only is the transaction more profitable, but you also have a much better control of what's going on and what your customer data is.
Thank you. Could you clarify, Bryce, I think we all know how many hours per week is considered a FTE, which is full-time employee?
So the original guidance, most people referred to the Affordable Care Act, which I believe is 30 or 32 hours. However, I have seen some banks, and remember, banks are they're kind of the gatekeeper for this forgiveness, right? Some banks are allowing you to treat an FTE as 40 hours a week. I think the most conservative model, though, is that whatever you originally counted your FTEs as when you completed the application. So if you use 30 hours, then you're going to use 30 hours to count.
Thank you. Are bonuses included in the PPP money?
You are allowed to give bonuses. However, it is capped at $100,000 annualized. So if somebody's, making $80,000 and then you give them, a $5,000 bonus over the course of the loan, or annualized $5,000 bonus, you're good. But if somebody's already making $100,000 and you give them a $5,000 bonus, it's annualized, then it is not forgivable.
Okay. So you have 2 employees at 15 hours a week. Does that equal 1 full-time employee? Question.
Yes.
Okay. One gentleman recommends that you send a certified letter to the last known address as well, just to cover your, you know what. Thank you for that comment. Bryce, I think I answered a lot of the questions. These slides are also available. If you need them, we can send them to you. Is that right, Ashley?
And they'll be available on the FRLA.org/webinars page later on this afternoon.
And I think it's been a long afternoon. I will also recommend two things. I would visit our website where FDR has a calculator there. They're going to update it. Those of you, there's some new questions about this. I highly recommend, if you go to our website, we have two different webinars that we go in a little bit deeper on this. Texas does a good one we partnered with. And there's one with the Illinois Restaurant Association, PPE forgiveness webinar that was done on May 26th. And there's a lady on there with the Self-Help Federal Credit Union that really walks you through this step by step. That's a little more intense, a little bit more on a slower level. So if you don't understand this, I would go to that webinar or download that webinar and listen to that webinar. It's about 30-40 minutes long. It's really slow, but it's very informative.
The great thing, if I could add something, the great thing about that particular webinar, it really focuses on how you fill out the PPP forgiveness form. So how you get your forgiveness on these loans, and it's very focused on that. Now, I will say that in the case of both of those webinars, as well as this one, is that all the information continues to change because the interpretation, just because it's the law now, there's still some discussion over, pieces inside the law of how that will be administered. And for instance, the sliding scale piece that we talked about earlier, the 75%, 60% piece. So, keep checking the websites and that the resources we're providing on these websites, because we're going to probably have to be continuing to update some of this based on some of the specific rules within the new laws. But the overall takeaway is this is great for our industry. It was a hell of a lobbying effort that took place by our industry as well as several others most impacted by coronavirus. But this is a big win that if you do the right things and we can get business back to a decent level, then there's a good chance that a significant portion of these loans can be forgiven.
Is there more money available for?
Oh, real quick, great question from Mike Quillen. Bryce, is there any more money available for those who haven't applied?
Yeah, I don't remember what the exact number is now, but there is still a sizable chunk left of the last appropriation. So I think you can still get your loan. If you're.
His question is different. He's asking if you've already received money. Is there money available for those of us who have already received money?
More money? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Is there?
Yes.
I believe the answer is yes, but again, it has to go through the bank that's going to grant you the loans, right, Bryce?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I will add to that too, though, for certain multi-unit restaurants, so some of our multi-restaurant clients, we're actually actively seeking the Main Street Lending Facility loan. So that's one to look at too for kind of an extra umph of liquidity on top of the PPP. So that's an option. It gets rolled out, I think, this week. It's a little bit different. There's no forgivable portions, but if you're finding that you need some extra cash flow as well, that's another option.
So Bryce, if you haven't applied yet, what would be your recommendation?
If you haven't applied, then if you already have an existing relationship with the bank, I would go through them. If you do not have an existing relationship with the bank or you don't have a contact, there are a lot of options out there. QuickBooks, if you have QuickBooks Payroll, they're offering it. Toast has some partners that you can go through. And there's a lot of different Florida banks that, are giving loans to different restaurant providers, even if they don't work with them. I know First Home Bank in St. Petersburg has been giving loans to those that don't have a relationship with them necessarily. So there's a lot of options out there. Just depending, kind of depends on where your relationship is.
Rick, what about EDL or SBA?
The EIDL. So the EIDL, we are now seeing people getting funding for that, but I do think that they're pretty close to the cap. Last that I checked, admittedly about a week and a half ago, they were only accepting agricultural applications, but that could have changed. But at least as about a week and a half ago, that was now no longer available to restaurants or hotels.
Oop, I can't answer any questions. My computer just went off.
Okay, well, I'm going to be assigned because it's 2:00.
So here's what we've got a lot of questions. I'm going to make 2 recommendations. We'll send out the information from the slides and the recording. We'll also send you information about the Illinois Restaurant Association PPP webinar, and we were a sponsor of that, by the way. And there's a couple others we'll put on there to have a little more information. Bryce and Rick, thank you, but your 800 number is still up. If people have questions and concerns, you can answer those, correct?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and email us info@FTR Hospitality, and I think my email might be out there as well. So feel free to email us with questions.
You want to just give out that phone number real quick, Bryce?
Yeah. So 1 second, I actually have to look it up. I don't have it memorized.
Well, I'll tell you the website first of all, because it's on there also. But so you can submit questions via the website or the phone number, but it's both restaurantcaresact.com or hotelcaresact.com.
We'll make it even easier. You go to our website and their FTR pops up there, and you can go to all those different sites and answer your questions.
Okay.
So any other last minute words of advice, Bryce or Rick, before we close? Carol. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And if you have any questions, give us a call.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate you.